Penn State meteorology students can choose among several different specializations within the major, and one of those is air quality meteorology. And if you're in that option, you'll likely take a class from someone who's on the front lines of air quality forecasting in the northeastern United States. That would be Bill Ryan, who stops by this evening and joins us on Weather World. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks.
Let's start by sort of laying out the pollutants that you forecast for in the specific area that you forecast.
Well, I forecast for the Philadelphia metropolitan area, which includes all the suburbs of Philadelphia and New Jersey and Delaware. And we forecast for ozone and for fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, it's often called, sometimes called soot.
Right. And most people this time of year, they do sort of have an elevated awareness of the ozone issue, but it's not just ozone anymore.
Right. Recent scientific medical research has shown that very small or fine particles can get into your lungs, and not just get into your lungs, but pass from your lungs into your bloodstream and cause a host of cardiopulmonary problems as well as lung damage.
Okay. So, and of course, air quality and weather are linked. So, on a day when you're assessing possible pollution issues for the following day, what are the key weather variables that you're focusing on?
Well, we focus first on what the current conditions are in terms of weather and air quality, because most of these pollutants have a fairly long lifetime in the atmosphere, days, so that today is often going to be tomorrow in terms of that. But then we look at wind, speed, and mixing of the lower atmosphere. If it's a real turbulent day with a lot of mixing and clouds forming, you get a lot of ventilation.
Okay.
But if it's a day with not much mixing and not much wind, then you can get pollutants to accumulate. So that's the main thing we look at.
And whenever we talk about pollution issues, you always emphasize to me that it's not just a local problem, but air quality is a regional scale issue. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, as I mentioned, both ozone and fine particles have what we call long lifetime in the atmosphere. That means they stick around day after day after day. So they can travel long distances. So one of the most effective pollution control strategies we've had in the last couple of years have been regional controls of power plants. And we saw immediate response to that and better air quality.
So when you look at wind direction for Pennsylvania specifically, and if you want to focus on southeast PA and Philadelphia, what wind direction would be most favorable for unhealthy air quality in Pennsylvania? I presume it would be a southwest wind.
West, anywhere west. There's a sort of a corridor we think of that goes from northwest to southwest. So from, say, Buffalo down into central West Virginia. That's raises red flags for us when we see wind coming from that direction.
Okay. Now, I understand that the rules have sort of changed this year in terms of what one would consider a poor air quality day because the standards have changed. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for ozone was lowered this spring, so by about a little more than 10%. So that what will happen is you'll probably, if you live in the Philadelphia area, you'll see more bad air warnings. Even though, on the whole, the air has been getting better, the recent research has shown that you can suffer damage at sustained levels at lower concentrations. So that's why they changed the standard.
Okay, and so you mentioned that in general the air is getting better.
Yes.
I mean, can you sort of lay out the history of air quality over the, say, the last decade, the last 30 years? So the air today really, in an absolute sense, is cleaner than it was just a decade ago?
Well, for ozone, for sure.
Okay.
Starting in 2003, the EPA issued new rules that reduced oxides of nitrogens emitted by power plants across the entire eastern United States. So we've seen ozone come down in response to that. Fine particles have come down slightly in a bit because they're also controlled by the acid rain program. Same sort of pollutants are in acid rain as in fine particles. They've come down, but not to as large degree as ozone has. So we're still working on that.
It seems to me that the landscape of air quality forecasting has sort of changed in the last decade in the following sense. When I go to the National Weather Service website, right there is a link directly to air quality forecasts. Could you comment a little bit about what you get if you go to those forecasts?
Well, Congress mandated that NOAA and EPA make what we call a numerical forecast model for ozone and fine particles, and that's been running for about 4 or 5 years. And it's a forecast model just like a weather forecast model, only it also, in addition to forecasting the weather, it also will forecast concentrations of ozone. And they're working on a fine particle forecast model as well.
And I would presume that given that air quality depends so sensitively on the weather, that the accuracy of air quality forecasts sort of lags behind the accuracy of more conventional weather forecasts.
We kind of say that we're sort of a generation behind.
Okay.
So we're sort of with air quality forecasting where weather forecasting was a generation ago.
Okay. And just to finish things up, I saw the report last week from the American Lung Association that ranked Pittsburgh now this year as the #1, I guess, sootiest city in the United States. And both you and I were born in Western Pennsylvania. Did that surprise you?
Well, I'm going to rise to my hometown's defense. The health departments put monitors where they think the air is going to be the worst. So what happens in a place like Pittsburgh is they'll put a monitor in a river valley near a Coke plant, for example, or a big processing plant. And in that specific spot, yes, it's very bad. But if you look at the metropolitan Pittsburgh area as a whole, the air quality is not that bad. They're a victim of topography and local industry.
Right, the Mon Valley with the Clairton Coke Works. Bill Ryan, who forecasts here in the Department of Meteorology, air quality.
Thanks,
Bill,
John.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back in a moment with a recap of the forecast.